Hey squad, this is Brandon from the Bantu Sun, and thanks for joining us today. To get everybody caught up, NATO has just added its newest member. And who is it? Drumroll. Brrrr. Finland. Yep. So we were looking at this, and we called this out a couple weeks ago. We didn't know which one was going to join first, or if they was going to join together. It was supposed to be Sweden and Finland, but Sweden's kind of in a sticky spot with Hungary and Turkey. So this inclusion into NATO, it has to be a unanimous thing. So Finland was brought in, Sweden put on the back burner. But if you look at Sweden geopolitically, it's surrounded by NATO members. So on as far as I'm concerned, it's only a matter of time before Sweden gets to go ahead. And if it don't, so be it. Everything around it is NATO. So that area of the globe is pretty much covered. But most likely Sweden will be joining NATO as well. I think the what stuck out to me when this happened was how does this change the board? Does it fulfill kind of what we were talking about, or is it in contradiction to it? And 100%, it fulfills what we were talking about previously, as we talk about this expansion of NATO as a Eurocentric or Western centric model. And I don't necessarily believe NATO was set up this way in its original construction. I really do believe that a lot of it was built around defense of the United States by a means of the UK and France, and in their defense as well. So it solved those two security problems, especially in the face of communism, the Soviet Union, and all the destruction Europe had seen during the mid 20th century. But this also underlines what we continuously harp on. Intentions are just that. It's just merely intentions. And what's really important, what matters most, which you should keep your eye on, is capacity. Capacity, ladies and gentlemen, capacity. Not what you want to do, but what you can do. This is how, historically speaking, the powers move in this world. Looking at Finland, Finland is about 5.5 million people. It really doesn't change things drastically from a strategy point of view, but it does make things a lot easier. I think the real key plays here for NATO from a strategic point of view have already been locked away. If they're worried about Russian aggression, and if they're worried about being in a position to have run up on Russia, they're already there, right? There are 7 countries bordering the Arctic, which is pretty much going to be the Euro pond or the NATO pond. 6 out of those 7 countries are in NATO. That pretty much dominates that entire region and puts it under control of the Americans and the Europeans, more or less, or Western influence. The Baltics, all 3 Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, NATO, this is even more, to me, this is even more of a scare than Finland on NATO's border, because the part of Finland that's on NATO border, don't nobody live there. Of course, there's been a sordid history with Russia and Finland, but there's been massive sordid history with the Baltics and Russia as well. So that little sliver of land that Finland touches to Russia, even in their past wars, it wasn't even Finland win. Not because Finland was so all powerful. It's just the ROI wasn't there for Russian aggression. And when Russians went there, they faced a little stiff resistance, and they say, you know what, it's not worth it. Most of the population live in the capital, near the water at the shore at the southern tip of the country. So I don't think that's really a major demographic threat. It helps geographically because it is bordering Russia or it's closer to Russia, but it's not as close as Lithuania. Like Lithuania, now that's something you should be worried about if you're in Moscow. Missiles in Lithuania, Poland, Estonia, Latvia. So it's still Finland is, to me, it helps. It advances another place to put bases. It can be a second tier defense if something was to happen to the Baltics. But as far as like impending doom and danger on Russia, I don't really think Finland changed the game that way. Um, the countries of Poland and Ukraine cuts off Europe geographically. So I think Poland, they're a hawk, and they're firmly behind what's going on in Ukraine, and they're firmly behind America's hawkish stance on Russia, as opposed to a more lukewarm France. You would say Ukraine. Well, that's what the war is about. Can the West flip Ukraine over? That would completely cut Russia off from continental Europe with those two countries, and then the Black Sea emptying into the Mediterranean, the Greece and Turkey. That's another access. So all three access keys, or that Western demographically have a portion of Russia west of the Urals, which is about 70-80% of the population of Russia. Those main seas, the Arctic, the Baltic, the Black Sea, which gets cut off on its way to the Mediterranean by the Bosphorus, by Turkey, which is NATO. These are all firmly within Western military control right now. So if you're Russia, it's getting a little it's getting a little steamy in the room. So I think the question becomes, so where do we go from here? Of course, there's going to be the Russia-Ukraine situation, and who knows how that's going to play out. Russia's going to squeeze Belarus even tighter. Uh, their leader, Lukashenko, I think he's one of the oldest serving world leaders. And I think that's one of the few things stopping Russia from just outright annexing this place, because you can it's all they have left really from a alliance point of view. Belarus hasn't engaged in a war, at least not directly, but as far as the West, and I don't think that the stand's going to be much reliable. That old Soviet Union influence in Central Asia, I think that's pretty much withered away. They're subject to much stronger forces at this time, such as a China or Turkey. Russia still has a little sway, but not what it needs. And besides, that's not where it's being threatened at. It's being threatened on its western border. So I think Russia is going to have to double down in that relationship with Belarus. And I do think they're probably 51-49. I'm not sure what exactly is evolving in Ukraine right now. It seems as though the Russians are just trying to take a sliver piece or a slight piece of the country to give themselves a buffer for defense. So how that war plays out is going to be major, because that's a 30 plus million population in Ukraine. So that switch sides to NATO, man, that is a really big deal. And if they do come on top, they're not going to have any love for Russia for the rest of the 8 days. So I also am looking at the Caucasus. So I want to go back to the old hawks of thinking about John McCain presidential run, and I want to say 2000, was it 16? I want to say, or might have been, it was John McCain, one of his presidential runs, and it was a big issue where he was talking about we're all Georgians now. Do you guys remember that? Yeah, it was the 2012, or it was like 2012 or 2008. But it was John McCain. There was an invasion, Russia into Georgia. Russia was just asserting their hegemony. And John McCain said, we're all Georgians now. And I remember at that time they were trying to pull in Ukraine, or pseudo-reference Ukraine as, pseudo-reference Georgia, pseudo-reference Georgia as part of NATO. So we'll see. That Caucasus region it's three countries: Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is having some issues with Armenia right now. Armenia is allied, roughly speaking, with Russia. There's been a major GDP boost there, as many Russians have fled there and took their wealth there, as well as their business during this time of tumult. So we'll see how that region cracks out, if Georgia's on the fence. But it's all about, where do NATO really see themselves? And right now, they have formed themselves into this European bastion of ideas and culture. Like, these people think they're on the same side, and they're representing the same thing. And this can be a very dangerous thing when you start looking at these players and you start thinking about if Russia was to fall or acquiesce. I continually harp on that because this is really shaping up to be an intense situation. I think that the reason NATO is getting so built up, so bulky, why it's so urgent to do this now is because we're moving to that tripolar world where China primarily, India just needs to get their act together. But India has a lot of the fundamental things that would really put them in a position to get a lot of things done in this world. But especially for China in the short term, Indian down the line, and then who else knows what's next? But these countries, Europe, Canada, United States, they're putting their feet in, making sure their ducks are in a row, and they're ready to roll into the mid 20th century and beyond as a cohesive unit, ready to take on any foes. And I also want to stress this fact: NATO is a military alliance. So it's pretty much saying that any country within this alliance is backed by the other countries. The famous Article 5, right? So your country is ran by really who has the guns. And if you look at a successful revolution, it's usually because the people with the guns flip sides. So, or they're carrying out the revolution and in a coup. But you kind of got to understand, like, when these places are militarily controlled by NATO, of course they're going to be politically controlled by NATO. Its military action is almost a non-starter conversation in most um, political debates. When the last time a war has decided the outcome of an election? Really, I can't think of it. I can't think of where the people were against a war and they voted out a party, and that party, the winning party, has left the war. Even in the US, I think there already been leanings towards drawing down and possibly drawing down for they can escalate what's going on in Ukraine. This I can't speak to. But I can't think of it being a major deciding factor of, like, even right now, what's going on in Syria. Does anybody believe what's going on in Syria is going to decide the next presidential election? So I think these European countries, now that they're going to be in NATO, I think military conversations is off the board now. They're in the fold, and that means they're committed. Let's just say you're in for a penny, you in for a pound situation. So I'm going to continue to monitor this, see how it plays out, but definitely a major big piece of news with Finland joining NATO, and the fact that it advances our theory forward that NATO is going to be a Western/European hegemonic power force. And the question now is, where do NATO think Europe ends? So that's our thoughts. Love to hear what you have to say. Please comment below, like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Until next time, take care. Bantu up.